How are y'all doing today? My name is Robby Ballmeyer, and these are my friends, Stu Wood
Hello, everybody.
and Nato Verdo.
What's up?
And this is the Rebuilt Life podcast, helping you rebuild your life around the way of Jesus. All right, so let's pick up from our previous episode 2. We talked about deconstruction and really kind of laid the groundwork that deconstruction is a process by which we dismantle, or it's a reduction of prior held belief system. And so really it's the answer to a question. Maybe that question is around what Mike Erie suggested on the Voxology podcast was disillusionment or discipleship or deconversion, redefinition, doubt, or disorientation, that we are trying to better understand something. And that can be caused by a lot of different things that we want to say, man, what I believed or held or did before didn't work. And so we talked about that really deconstruction isn't necessarily a bad thing. Can be a necessary thing because part of it can be a maturing of our faith, that sometimes we deconstruct because it's time for us to grow up and we have to stop thinking like a child and we have to move on to some stuff of substance. And so we had mentioned an article by a pastor named Joshua Ryan Butler, and he is in Arizona as a pastor out there. And before that, he was in Portland at Imago Dei. And so he wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition, and it's entitled, I'll pull up the article here, the four causes of deconstruction. And so what we just want to do is I just want to briefly walk through this and set it up for us, and then kind of round it out a little bit more. Joshua has been really generous on Twitter with people who were saying, hey, this isn't that wasn't for me. I didn't understand that. And he's kind of making the podcast rounds. We're nowhere big enough to get him on our podcast, but I didn't ask. So maybe we're not. He and said, man, I would have done this differently or said this differently. So we're going to take this 1,800 word article really as just a glimpse, as a part of the story written as a pastor for people that he's pastoring. And we know that maybe you are going to have more that you would say, but what about this? You'll have that moment on that. We completely understand. So I won't read the whole article, but you can find it on the Gospel Coalition, 4 Causes of Deconstruction. So there's number one reason that he starts with is that the reason that somebody would deconstruct, so they would dismantle a belief system, is church hurt. He says church hurt is real, but deconstruction, he claims, is a false cure. And so he gives a diagnosis, church hurt, and then he says that the cure for that is grief and lament. And Nato, you kind of mentioned that last time, that was kind of frustrating to you. Can you maybe go into that a little bit again? Like, why is lament not the best answer for church hurt?
Yeah, because when you lament, it can help you process the emotions that you're feeling, but it does not provide a solution because you are just in your emotions, right? You're trying to process them, and there's only so much you can do, especially if you were someone like me who didn't have the tools and resources to know how to process that in a healthy way. And so what I would have loved for him to do is, I mentioned last time, of pointing people into the direction of clinical therapists who can help people process these things. I would have also have loved for him to say, hey, pastors, your people are suffering. So why don't you guys go out there and be with them and try to figure out why they're feeling this way and walk with them through that. Yeah, I just would have really have liked him to say more than just, oh, wallow in your despair.
Yeah.
Because wallowing in your despair does not solve the problem. And I know there's only so much he can say in a short article, but I think he could have at least given something to coincide with what that grief and lament looks like.
Yeah, and we certainly, I'm not trying to attack Butler in this at all. I'm sure he would come on and say, oh yeah, totally. Yeah, that, I think he said often, it was, Amen to that, right? Amen. And again, like yes, 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 all the way. I think the biggest thing about lament, and we see that in the Psalms, and we see this idea of there's Psalms of lament that teach us how to be honest, and they teach us how to pray, they teach us how to rejoice, and they teach us how to have sorrow, and that what ultimately lament does, the Lamentations, right? Lament, the Psalms of Lament do, they give us permission. They give us permission to be angry. They give us permission to have doubt. They give us permission to not have it all figured out. And so there are times where, man, I don't have the right words to pray. Man, I'm opening up the Psalms, and I'm going to look at Psalms that, man, there's this cry like, God, where are you? God, how long will I have to wait? God, what is going on? God, why are you tolerating this evil that's in the world? And I think of like Psalm 138, and he basically like says, I'm going to go kill that guy because he doesn't follow you, God. Like, and he's like, I hate him because he doesn't like you, and I'm going to go kill him. And then he stops and he goes, but see if there's any wicked way in me. Like, dude, like you just said, you're going to like kill that guy. Like, and so, yes, I think grief and lament are a process. I don't think they're the cure for that. And I think, therapy, pastoral care, spiritual direction, which is something I would love to talk about. Maybe I can get Karen on, my spiritual director, on to talk about spiritual direction. I wonder if she'd be up for that. And Karen, if you're listening, and I hope you are, we'd love to have you on. So, Stu, what are your thoughts on this one?
So really, I have a question more so than anything. It's just like, if you have been hurt by the church, how are you expected to trust in the institution or any institution, that's a church at that point in time, to actually give you any sort of reconciliation or healing? Like how would you trust that? Really, though, especially if you're really struggling with it, like how are you going to trust that process then? To just say, oh, go through grief and lament. It's just like, here's the spiritual way to do it, but it's just like, I don't trust you people at this point. Like I can't trust you people.
Yeah, it's such a tough question. So we're going to just wrap the podcast with that right now. And just thanks for listening. And no, I'm just kidding. So, yeah, man, that's so hard. And I think that's where there's no quick solutions. And that, of course, and Butler would agree, like that's the problem with the 1,800 word blog post, basically. Like, this is about relationship. This is about time. This is not a microwave solution. This is crock pot living. It's going to take a while. And my encouragement, and Nato, like you talked last time, like you had a therapist is like, man, maybe you need to bow out for a little bit. But you said you didn't cut off people. Like, I think that's the important thing. Like, there may be a season like you don't go to the service because it is traumatic and there's something going on. But let's just be honest, guys. Like, there are some guys and women who are pastors that really shouldn't be. They are pastors because they couldn't make it and cut it in the marketplace. And so they're like, oh, I'll do that because it's easy. It's not. Being a pastor is hard. And there's been even my own personal struggles in that, but I work a full-time job outside of being a pastor that I've been able to prove to myself, like, no, I can do this. I think it was Paul David Tripp who said, man, if you can do anything other than being a pastor, go do that. Because the church doesn't need people that weren't called to be pastors. And so you have a lot of guys that are just, oh, man, causing a lot of hurt. And so how are you supposed to trust? Man, give it time. Don't give up on Jesus. Even if for a while you give up on the church, and guard your heart against um, uh, prolonged bitterness, right? But it's okay to take a time out and find some like-minded people. But this is what I was talking about, like people that just want to deconvert and destroy, man, I would stay away from those. Like, try to find people who are like have walked through that in the past and come out on the other side. And I recently sat with a lady at the church who's like, I'm mad at God for what happened with my mom and she got sick. I'm mad. And I had to give her, like, I didn't need to, but I gave, like I said, man, God can handle you being mad. He can handle you being upset. And I think sometimes we try to be good rather than be honest. I don't know, Nato, you have thoughts on that?
And sticking to the church hurt thing, I did want to clarify when I said last episode that I didn't cut people out. I did cut out the people that were toxic and bringing harm to
Oh
me.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make sure I point that out. I did not cut out the people who continued to love and be supportive and and just be with me. They sat with me in the ways that Job's friends should have sat with him in the pain, right? Instead of telling him what to do. And I had those people in my life who did sit with me. So, yeah, I just want to highlight that element of it, of as you process it, it's okay to cut people out. Just finding those people that you can trust and rely on to help you through that process.
Yeah, I think we as Christians a lot of times have problems with healthy boundaries. I'd recommend Cloud and Townsend's Healthy Boundaries books. They're all about boundaries for various things. But it's okay to have boundaries, and it's okay to say, no, I'm not putting myself in that situation, and that you are not like dishonoring God because you're like, I'm not going to that church anymore. And you also don't have to cut every person out of that church. Like the church, it's not a cult. Like it's one club, different tree houses, as my mom used to say, right? Like it's okay. To go find someplace else so you can be in community, that you can be with others. So yeah, man, it's tough. And so if you're going through church hurt right now, the abuses, scandals that are coming out, I am, as a pastor, like I am so sorry that happened to you. And I want to assure you that we're not all like that. I also want to assure you that Jesus is not like that. And so part of my story is church hurt. I took an internship with the church in Minneapolis for a while, and things were good. And found myself in a bit of hot water with a girl that we got into a relationship that shouldn't have been, and found myself getting like rebuked by this guy and walked through a restoration process. And turns out this guy who was in charge of the church was in an affair with another pastor's wife for like 4 years. And it ripped the church apart. And I was disillusioned. I was hurt, distrusting, and just miserable. And I'm like, I'm going to like divorce the church just to marry Christ. Like I like Jesus. I hate the church. And I had to wrestle with that at this point, gosh, almost 20 years ago. And at a young age, trying to figure that out. But I couldn't get rid of Jesus. And so I decided I was going to go and just say, you know what, like that's cool. Ministry, I guess that's not going to happen anymore. I'll just go make some money. I made a lot of money flipping houses before the market blew up in '08. It was, 2003, 2004. I was 20 years old driving a BMW, making deals. I felt like, the crap. And God just grabbed me and was like, you need to go to Bible college. And there's more to that story. And I find myself begrudgingly kicking and screaming, sitting in a Bible college class going, fine, I'll just like, if I have to do ministry, then I guess I'll just be a professor because I'm going to be a terrible pastor. In fact, I was seeing a counselor at the time who told me I was going to be a terrible pastor. And I'm fine. Like it wasn't rude. He was right. People hear that and they go, that was rude. He was right. Like my head and my heart were not connected because I was so angry. And I was like, man, I can intellectually follow Jesus and just become like a scholar and do that. And somewhere around my sophomore year, after walking through this for like 7 years of walking through this dark time, I just realized, like I was reading a book. It's a huge book called Jesus According to Scriptures by Darrell Bach. It's a commentary, and I saw Jesus for the first time in my life. And I went, oh man, like he is worth following. And that just hit me. And all of a sudden it became real and it became true. And like, I just, in that moment, man, like it was, all that hurt just dissipated because of this, like who Jesus was. And I said, I committed, like, I am not going to be that kind of pastor. And so find myself like graduating soon and going, oh shoot, like I want to be in a church now, and I didn't do a ministry degree. And so and approached a church that was my wife's home church, and got an internship, eventually got hired there, and like and been really functioning as a pastor ever since. And there's been more church hurt from there. I've had that church gave me church hurt. The church after that gave me church hurt. Like I'm in charge of a church and I'm afraid I'm going to hurt people now. Like it's scary. But the way I confront that with myself is accountability with others. I don't do this alone. Accountability on from finances to my sexuality to what I'm teaching. There's so accountability is huge, and community. Like I don't do it alone. There's people around me that take some of that burden. So let's talk about his second point is poor teaching, and that Jesus deconstructs bad teaching in order to reconstruct good teaching. And so he says the diagnosis is bad teaching. You've had bad teaching. The cure is good teaching. Stu, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, how am I supposed to know the difference? I mean, really though, like if you've been in a church where you just have received terrible, bad teaching, and you're just like, ugh, like how are you supposed to recognize it, especially if you haven't grown up in it, if you haven't, you know, really done any study yourself, like, and really knowing, what Jesus said versus, what somebody is saying. This is what I think Jesus said. How are you supposed to know the difference in those situations? That's really the, kind of the kicker there. Is just like, if you've received bad teaching, how do you know what good teaching is? And are you willing to listen to it if you've been hurt by the church?
Yeah. Nato, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know how to answer that question.
Great
That's
question.
actually very true. Because there's a church on almost every corner, everywhere you go in every city, right? And so, how do you navigate which one's good, which one's going to be toxic and bad? Um, I feel like that's maybe a whole nother conversation to have. Uh, but yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I guess the only answer really is try to do as much research as you can on the organization you're trying to join. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that one.
I mean, I think, realistically, like if you were open to trying other things, you might go somewhere that obviously attracts a lot of people. That surely they've got to be doing something right. But even then, big churches have hurt people in far greater numbers, probably than.
Yeah, I think we got to get out of the mindset that like, oh, this church won't hurt me. It's ran by people. In some ways, they're going to fail you. Some ways they're going to frustrate you. So I guess if we think about teaching, I think for me, it comes down to, and I'm probably going to oversimplify this, but to focus on the clear over the ambiguous, that there are some very clear teachings of, loving our neighbor, turning the other cheek. And how do they answer that? And then what do they do? Where do they put their values? Where's their money going? Those kind of things as good teaching. I don't think it just happens to be somebody on stage that is a great speaker or a storyteller, but really like, how are they living and how are they doing? And in some regard, and that's why I don't say necessarily go to a big church or go to a small church, because I think the small ones have advantages. You could probably know the guy who's teaching. Big ones you probably won't. But the big ones are going to have probably more opportunities and places to serve, a bigger impact, not a greater impact, just a bigger impact. And so to me, it really looks like do your own study, man, that we have never lived in a time such as this where you could have instant access to the Bible for free, as well as commentaries and things like that are all free or relatively inexpensive, and that you can get and you can study and research for yourself. So I think pay attention to the things that are clear, and and maybe don't argue over the ambiguous things of what does this mean? What does that mean? I think about how to properly read Genesis. Yes, there are some interpretations that I think honor the Bible more, but I'm not going to fight over that. Like, that's not a salvation issue for me. But do you think that Jesus was really God and really and fully man? Yeah, let's talk about that. Do you think about his virgin birth? What do you think about that? How do you treat the poor? How do you give to missions? How do you, like, all of that stuff really matters. And so, how do you tell the difference between the two? I think it's walked out and lived out, and you may not know right away. And so compare it, to the scriptures. And this is where, is it Paul with the Bereans, where he's like, man, they didn't just take what I told them. They went and looked it up themselves. And now you have the opportunity, yes, to look it up in the Bible, but you have access to scholars like people have never in the history of the world have, to really go and look. And yes, there are such things as Bible experts. There are people that know more than you, that have studied it longer than you. And I love Eugene Peterson. He wrote, the Message paraphrase of the Bible, and people would, before he died a few years ago, they would write him later in his life and try to argue with him over Hebrew or Greek of the way he translated that. And he said, he's like, I would love to have this discussion. So it's all handwritten notes. I'd love to have this discussion with you. But until you become an expert in either Greek or Hebrew, I don't think we can really have we can have the kind of conversation you want to have about this. So I would suggest going and studying one of these languages. 4 years in it should be enough. Unfortunately, by the time you get done with that, I'll probably be dead. So we'll just have to leave it at that. Like, it was just like, man, there are some things, unless we've actually spent time studying it, we're probably ignorant to it. And so don't be ignorant. Go and study it yourself. Be a Berean and go and look it up yourself. And then go live it out. Did that work? Did that make me more peaceful like Jesus, or more angry and ticked off,
Yeah, one thing I did want to, it's funny because it coincides with similar to what you were saying, but I did want to point out about this second point, that another frustration I had with it, his article. So we had already mentioned the elephant in the last episode, right? And so the whole point of the elephant essentially is that we're driven more by our confirmation bias than we are by what the actual data, facts, etc. present. So we will try to find the answers that suit our narrative. We don't necessarily even do it intentionally. It just happens because that's how our brain is wired. So my frustration with this point, like, oh, bad teaching, find good teaching. Well, then it's like, okay, well, the way that our brains can be, we could just go somewhere that has good teaching that fits our narrative, right? And probably this is a bad example because it all crumbled, but I just think of like the people who went to the Mark Driscoll church, right? Everyone was a part of his church. He's preaching the gospel. He's this, he's that. And then they're there and they start embracing some of those toxic theological perspectives that he had. And so a lot of those leaders ended up hurting people. And I don't want to focus on the hurt part, but just saying like these people had confirmation bias towards what he was doing and they embraced it. Or even another pastor, I won't say his name, but another pastor, I actually worked at his church after he was gone, where he was, I would argue people would still say like he's a good leader. I'm sorry, a good pastor to some extent. At the same time, though, he did a lot of really bad things, and like he was processing his theology while he was in the midst of leading the church until one day he was just like, I'm leaving, and he just left because God had called him to do something different, and that like messed up a lot of people, right? And so, but a lot of people were there for him because of the theology that he was teaching, and then when he left, their theology also crumbled. And so it's just really hard to be like, oh, find good teaching, because we don't necessarily know how to do that. And so I don't know what the solution there is, but just, I guess, just identifying that just because you're somewhere that seems good and seems like they're teaching the right thing, we should still be questioning and trying to figure out, is this on the track towards Jesus, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that confirmation bias is so interesting. I think about 2 Timothy 4:3. It says, "For a time will come when people will not put up a sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear." And I think there's like this great pride, like, that's not us, but that's them. That's them over there. And we want to point fingers and like, oh, like, I'm listening to the word of God. They're just hearing what they want to hear. And man, we fall into that so quickly. So I'd listen wide. I'd listen from other traditions outside of your camp, and listen to stuff that makes you uncomfortable, and then back up and go, why did that make me uncomfortable? Was it just because it was a new idea? Was it because I can point to scripture and go, no, that's not a right interpretation? And not just, that's not how I feel about this, but no, like, that's not even the way the church historically has taught that. And now you're saying it means something else. That guy's not Jesus, where he says, you've heard it said, but I tell you, like, that's not okay. And so you are rooted. I think our postmodern society would teach us that, like, oh, you're an individual, you're your own person. But when we are saying I'm a Christian and connected to the Christian faith, I'm actually attached to this great tree root system that goes so deep and so wide that I can't see how far it goes, but you can trace it through writings of church fathers, the desert fathers, the Spanish saints, things like that. That I may have mentioned that right now. You're going, the what? That's what I'm saying. Like, there's things out there you're not even aware of, that the church as a whole has wrestled with and thought through, and we're doing Google searches saying it's research. They're not synonyms. They're not the same thing. His third point is a desire to sin. That deconstruction is a poison, not medicine. It supplements the sin that's killing you rather than healing it. And so the diagnosis, desire to sin. The cure is confession and repentance. Stu, thoughts on that?
Oh, there's a lot of thoughts on that, especially just because, I mean, so after my conversion from Catholicism to evangelical Christian, and then graduating high school, took a year off, started going to Bible college. And it was after my sophomore year of Bible college that, well, it was during my sophomore year, but I started getting into a relationship that I really shouldn't have been in, that ended up turning me away from God. And it was because of the desires of my heart. And just, I mean, I went into a really, really bad place. And then I struggled for years after that with another crisis of faith, an even deeper one. And this is already after I had accepted Christ. And, I guess you could say it was another period of deconstruction, but it was more a period of desolation, just loneliness. And, just it took almost a decade before I really felt God's presence back in my life. And it felt like I had intentionally left a calling that he had placed on his life. That he had placed on my life, just, walked away from it almost. And it honestly, truly hurt. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was a desire to sin, but it wasn't a desire to follow God at that time in my life. Like, when I made that decision, I was not desiring to follow God over the relationship that I was in.
Yeah, and I guess I wonder if, like, deconstruction in this point is not the best term. And that for me, like, it'd be deconversion could be very much a desire to sin. Like, I don't want to follow Jesus, so I can just do my own thing. But also, if I'm deconverting, the cure for confession, repentance, sure. But like, if I don't care, you're not going to turn that up in me. And so I guess I'd just change that phrase where, like, deconstruction is a poison. I would say deconversion is a poison, not a medicine. Like, that's not actually going to make you better. It's going to make it worse over time. Like, stick it out. And I had a professor once say, he's like, man, if you give up on the church, don't give up on Jesus. And, it was like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I'll hold on to that. In the midst of everything I was going on, he said that. And so I think that's, for those going through deconstruction who still want to hold on to your faith. Butler puts in James 4:7-8, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Absolutely. Unless you don't give a flying flip, then it doesn't really matter, right? Like that's hard to counter. And that's where I would caution against deconversion at all costs. Like figure it out before you start drawing lines in the sand. And because your question may be different, and if you cut yourself off from Christian community, you may never get it answered, and you will just become more isolated and more bitter. That's the poison.
Yeah, I found so I don't know anything about this guy other than when he released this article. I probably sound like the biggest hater. I will say my own confirmation bias is that as somebody who went through deconstruction, um, I was frustrated, I guess, and I'll just put that out there. But yeah, I felt that this point was really interesting because it did sound like he was collapsing deconstruction into deconversion. And deconstruction does not necessarily mean you're going to deconvert. The other aspect within this is that, kind of going back to what I said last episode, is that the people who have deconstructed based on the data were the people who were the most invested. So, are there people who deconstructed because they just wanted to go sleep with that girl or whatever? I'm sure that happens. I'm not saying it never happens, but statistically, it's more likely that somebody deconverted because whatever, the stuff we already talked about, and maybe other stuff that's going on. That being said, yeah, I mean, when I was deconstructing, I wasn't sitting there saying, man, I just want to do all the stuff that I ever wanted to do that God didn't let me do. I just thought that was really reductionistic. And I just like your point of saying that this probably would fit more with a deconversion type of a post as opposed to deconstruction. The last thing that I want to say on this point is that he makes it seem as if to deconstruct can, and I guess this will go for all the points, but like it just automatically, and here's what you should do. And I just want to go back to what I said of like, I didn't control my deconstruction. It just hit me. Everything was happening. And that's more statistically of what happens with this process. So, yeah.
All right, so let's look at his last point. His last point was street cred, that basically everybody's doing it. And he said it's not wrong to want love and affirmation. It's just wrong to want it more than your fickle friends. Want it more from your fickle friends than your faithful God. And so he says the cure is crucifixion of an image. And so I think some of them, we've given permission to people. And he mentions Rob Bell, Rhett and Link. And so like, you can probably even name some others, Joshua Harris. There's some people that have deconstructed, still call themselves Christians, but they're not even like in the vein of historical Christianity anymore. And it's certainly some concerning things there. I think we've just given people permission to be honest about that. And where normally somebody would have maybe done this and not had social media to blast their thoughts out, and then they kind of just do it privately and they just kind of go away. Now we've given everybody a platform. And I say that ironically as we're on a podcast. But, like everybody has that platform and we just say it loud and proud. And, but again, I would just caution against anybody who once was a Christian leader who said, follow me towards Jesus. And then they're like, oh, never mind. I'm going this way now. Follow me this way. And just, it really should confront and call out our love of Christian celebrity and following people like, oh, that's my pastor. But like, you don't even go to their church like that. Like you got to be careful. Like, oh, I listen to them every single week. Like, yeah, but like, who's in your life? Who cares? And like, even for my church, like we do video teaching from pastors that most of my people have never met, but they know me. and I know those guys teaching and I vouch for them. But I'm their pastor. I'll marry them, baptize them, bury them. Like I'm the pastor in that. I don't say that patting myself on the back, but like the boots on the ground for that. Who is in your life that can come up with the pastorly care of you? And I think that's really important.
Yeah, this was the one point that I wish he wouldn't have named it street cred, because nobody freaking says street cred anymore. So I don't know why he said that.
What's your street cred to say that, though, that no one says that?
Yeah, exactly. The fact that I'm probably about 10 years younger than him, maybe more. Anyway, that being said, this was the one point that I did like a 50-50 on. So on the one hand, I do think what you're saying, that because of these big platforms and people coming out and saying, like, I don't believe this thing anymore, it's allowed other people to say, like, hey, finally, this person that I trusted said it, and I've been feeling this way, so now I'm going to do it too. So I think that could be part of it. At the same time, though, I just keep going back to what I said of, like, the majority of these people who have gone through this deconstruction thing were the faithful, right? And so it's not a accurate depiction. But going to these guys like a Josh Harris, I can't remember his name, of the guy who was in that band. He that came out as no longer Christian anymore last year, I believe it was.
Which one? There's been so many.
He was like the biggest one. I can't think of the name though. I didn't listen to them. So, but anyways, when these things happen, like, I'm sure that does spur on people to be like, oh, finally, I can do this. And I think that, yeah, the Christian celebrity aspect is really damaging to anything related to Jesus, because when it's somebody big that you trusted and they come and say, I don't believe this thing anymore, that could really impact this person who trusted them. Or even on the flip side, they still believe that stuff, but they did something that ruins their ministry because they were cheating on their wife or whatever the heck, and then that can also spur on this deconstruction aspect. So yeah, the Christian celebrityism is definitely an issue.
So, I mean, just playing into the Christian celebrity and, the amount of burden or, the monumental task that pastors are given, right? In relation to their congregations. And is there really a way to keep them healthy, right? If they're actually struggling. So, I mean, Robby, for instance, like, I'm sure you have people you can lean on and you can go to within your church and say, I'm struggling with something as a pastor, right? So are we taking actual care of our pastors in terms of their spiritual health and the crises of faith that they're going through? And I think that's where a lot of this is stemmed from, with a lot of these big celebrities is, I'm carrying this huge burden. I'm having crises of faith and I don't know what to do. And I don't know who I can go to, because I feel like a lot of times the church organization is not able to handle those situations. They don't handle them appropriately. You either ostracize the people who are coming in need of help, or they're just kicked out altogether. It's just like, we can't have pastors struggling with faith.
Yeah, I mean, if your livelihood's attached to it, you're probably less likely to even admit that you're struggling with that. And so it places you in a position where you have to teach, preach, counsel on things that you maybe don't even believe anymore. And I guess this plays in very much to reaping and sowing. Like, if I am sowing a seed that doesn't actually have seed in it, we should look at the harvest and realize what's going on. But man, so many, like, if my livelihood's attached to that, am I going to admit it? Probably not. We don't have space for that. I believe I'm in a healthy church that does have space for that, and I've seen it happen where they've admitted, oh, I'm having issues with this or this, mental health, marriage, whatever it is. And it's like, all right, we're still going to pay you, but you can take some time to step back and figure this out for a little bit. But that doesn't happen and a lot of churches can't afford to do that. I can't afford to keep somebody on who's not going to work for 6 months. Like, so it is scary. And that's probably a whole nother podcast about that. So,
but I do think that's important to bring up, because that was my experience, right? I'm working at this church that's primarily a Reformed church, and I'm like, I want to be Catholic, but I couldn't tell anyone because that was my livelihood. And if I tell them that, then I was going to lose my job. And sure enough, when it finally came out, that was like a big thing. And then with my marriage collapsing and blah, 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 they just said, we got to get you out of here. And so they didn't really provide that space to do that. And I think that most Christians, from my experience, this is more anecdotal, but my experience of people that I knew, that was their thing. They were afraid to tell someone, whether because it was attached to their livelihood or even just their friend community circle, right? You tell them, I'm not sure if I believe these things or this thing or whatever. And then what could happen is that people start talking about you behind your back. Pray for Billy because I'm not sure if he's really whatever, right? And then you start losing that trust. And it just becomes this big vicious cycle. And so I do agree that churches need to figure out, and Christians in general just need to figure out how they can provide that space for people to process those things, especially for someone on staff, especially likelihood that as this person is growing and maturing and learning new stuff, they're going to start having these questions. And so we need to basis for them, because we are all fluid as far as how we develop. We're going to believe one thing when we're one age, but as we learn more and grow, those things are going to change. So how do we help guide the ship, the rudder of that ship?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And we kind of, as we move on from the article, let's kind of establish a little bit more to this for us, that sometimes we're going to deconstruct because of church hurt. Sometimes we get disillusioned, do that. But I want to say that sometimes we are going to deconstruct, and Nato, you alluded to it right there, because of maturity, that our faith grows and you grow up. And sometimes we actually mislabel spiritual growth as deconstruction, because at its core, we really don't understand what makes us grow. It's like this big mystery. And it's like again, seed that I sow into the ground, and what comes up. I don't understand how I put an apple seed in the ground, give it time, it sprouts up, give it even more time, it becomes a massive tree, give it more time, it produces fruit. I don't get that. We could have a scientist on and he could probably scientifically explain it, and we'd lose all our tens of followers. But I just, that was funny, guys. All right.
Went right over my head. I'll be honest.
His mic's all muted. The one time he's muted, he laughed.
But I was muted. I was laughing hysterically.
All right. But the point being, we don't understand how spiritual growth works, and that we think because we can't chart it, that means we can't track it. But sometimes we're growing up, and one of the ways that we grow up is this process of, and I think one of you mentioned it earlier, it's called desolation. And this is the process where God actually removes his felt presence from us to reveal in our lives where we need his spirit more. And it's kind of like a parent teaching a child how to ride a bike. And so when I was teaching my kids, don't let go, don't let go, don't let go. And there's going to be times, and then you let go and you're like riding or you're not, like, but I'm still right there, but maybe I'm not holding the seat. And hey, it's time to learn how to pedal. It's time to do this on your own, and figure that out. And so there's this process that we don't really talk about a lot about on this, is that the early church fathers, realized that, like we do, that spiritual growth does not work always up and to the right. If you look at a chart and you can, map it, a graph chart, that we always think it's up and to the right, that if I'm following Jesus over time, I started here down in the bottom left-hand corner, and just give me enough years and enough experience up and over, I will be in the top right quadrant by the time I die. And it doesn't work that way. And so some early church fathers, what we call them, and from first, second, third century, fourth century, realized this, and they realized it looks more like a mountain peak. It's up and down and up and down and up and down. And so in this process, that we have these upward motions in this, and that is the process that's called consolation. And so they think of like consoling. It's like this baby bottle where like, oh, I love to worship. I love to read my Bible. I love going to church. It's so great. Jesus is good, and I'm on fire. And we think that's the normal process of the Christian life. And then it hits desolation and starts going down. And all of a sudden it's like, the Bible sucks. I don't want to read it. I don't want to worship. Turn off this music. I don't want to go to church. And we're like, oh, maybe I'm not a Christian anymore. Like, no. Like, this is actually like part of the plan, that God is removing his felt presence. We know he's promised to never leave us, never forsake us. So he's there, but he's removed his felt presence. And it's much like, again, parenting. We go from a bottle with a crying baby in a bottle to a sippy cup that I want my kid to get more milk so that they can get more in their mouth to drink and be more satisfied. But when I pop that bottle out, they're going to cry. And so I have to give them now, but I'm like, hey, trust me. Like, I want to talk. I want to see what's going on. But far too many of us are like, God left me. He doesn't care about me. I'm out. Like, this doesn't work. And I've had people tell me like, Jesus isn't working. Like, man, what's going on? And so there's going to be seasons, perhaps years. And this is what I think I was going through from, Minneapolis after that church, and then going in, I was going through this part of consolation, then desolation. But there's a desolation that St. John of the Cross said would be so dark that your faith may not recover from it if you don't make out of it. And he called that one the dark night of the soul. And that, for me, that lasted about 7 years, that I really had to reason with who God was, who he had made me to be, what I was doing, and that I was crying and whining. And I don't mean to downplay church hurt and all that, but like, he was trying to grow me, and I was trying to seek comfort. God, don't you want me to be happy? And he says, no, I want you to be holy. Like, God, why can't things go smoothly? Because you need to trust me more in this area. And I had to process that over and over and over. And so for me, I realized like that dark night of the soul, the desolation, was him trying to grow me in that time. And so, so I think with that, we can ask ourselves, like, is it truly deconstruction, a desolation of this, or is it deconversion? Is it doubt, or is it more than that? Stu, you had something?
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of, you were talking about the graphs, just from my experience and, studying economics, and, it sounds like you're explaining a crypto chart. And if anybody has been following any of those for the past 2 decades, if you have the faith of a crypto holder, the desolation period's nothing. But there's a lot of desolation there.
Hang on. So people don't say street cred anymore, but we do say the faith of a crypto holder.
The faith of a crypto holder.
Term? Okay, yes.
Yeah,
Lord,
yeah,
grant me the faith of a crypto holder.
No, but I mean, just what you're talking about, the desolation, right? It was that I experienced was, from stepping away from, what I felt my calling on my life was. And it just what you're saying. I had to look at myself, and it's just like, God, don't you want me to be happy? Like, yeah, I made some mistakes. Can't I just crawl back into whatever? It's just like, no, dude, if you're swayed that easily, like, you don't have the fortitude to step back into what you were doing yet. It's like, you've got some time that you've got to spend and put in, and, really evaluate yourself. Really evaluate who I called you to be and what, you need to do in order to be ready for it. for me, it was one of those things where I wasn't sure my faith was going to make it out of it. And this was during that time that I had gotten married and had my kids and all that kind of stuff. And it was just like, wow, I took a lot of risks with other people's lives, not just my own, during that time. So, Rob, let me ask you a question. How can I tell if I'm deconverting or if I were going through desolation?
Yeah, I think it's really simple on this. Like, and Nato, you may add more to this, but I would start with like, you still care, like you still want to, like, I don't want to walk away from the scriptures. Like for me, I realized I wasn't deconverting because I was like, man, I still like Jesus. Like, I don't want to throw that away. Like, I still see goodness in the scriptures when I do read them. Like, I still, I didn't want to walk away. So I would narrow it down. Like for me, am I deconverting or is it desolation? Like, I actually still care about what's happening. Nato, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think another component of that is I came to a point where I think I would say I did deconvert because this would have been maybe middle of 2018 when I was just like I don't think that God is real. I guess I just don't believe this stuff, and so I wouldn't have like told people I was an atheist, but I definitely felt like one. Um, and so I said, all right, I'm done with this. And so I guess that process of getting to that point was just identifying that I guess pretty much reiterating what Rob said, but like I wasn't going to pick up the Bible anymore. I wasn't going to pray. I was not going to be a part of any of that community or anything. Um, and then kind of weeding through that, um, coming to and there's stuff that led up to this, but essentially coming to a perspective of saying like, oh, the real solution that I really wanted was realizing that I didn't have to believe in the God that people were telling me I had to believe in. And kind of going back to what I said in the last episode of identifying that there's things in Catholicism that I could hold on to, and there's things in Eastern Orthodox that I could hold on to. There's things from church history that stuck out to me, and I'm going to grab a hold of these things and make them a part of my life. Um, and once I did that, that's when I did experience that consolation. Uh, so yeah, I guess it really does come down to, do you care about this anymore or do you not? And if you don't care about it anymore, then you probably did deconvert. If you still care about it and you're languishing over it, then you probably are in that deconstruction phase, and hopefully you can find people to walk with you through that process.
I
Go ahead.
just see Nato now rolling down the Gregorian chant as he drives to work.
Yeah, it was a dark time.
I only wore medieval clothing, and
I did it one
actually,
time.
actually, funny enough, I would say about the time that I went to visit up there in 2018 with you guys, that was around the time where I was actually starting to have that turning point of like, actually, I think I do believe this stuff. I just don't believe the dumb stuff that people were telling me I had to believe. And I just think that that's great that you guys were able to see me at one of my lowest, but also I think the graph was starting to go up at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I always tell people that that trip was one of the most pivotal moments of my life.
Yeah, no, that's good. I, yeah, I think NATO kind of piggyback off what you said. Like there was, it's a process and recognize it. So like you're like, oh, I was about to go back up. Great, just recognize you're going to go back down. Like no one, it's a roller coaster, right? Like, and it's not a bad thing. No one rides roller coasters, and gets angry at that. It's just like, no, I rode it because that looked fun, or that would, like, it's a process. We understand that. And so off of what you were saying, I think it's be careful to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. And step 4 in the like 12-step recovery in the world of, addiction, is to make like a fearless, searching moral inventory, an honest inventory. And so you'd look at like resentments and fear and guilt, hate, hangups, all that, and you make a list of it, and really your reaction to those things you have. And I would say, if you think you are going through either deconversion or desolation, trying to figure that out, I would make a list of all the things that you're struggling with, and then a correlating reaction emotion to what it's drawing out, because some of them are going to be bigger than others, and you can start narrowing it down and realize, like, okay, is it a person? Man, like, I don't like that guy, Bob, right? Like, I don't like him. Sorry, Bob, if whoever you are. But like, I don't like that guy, or I don't like this part in the Bible. Okay, well then it's not a redefining, but it's like, man, maybe the way you were taught wasn't right. So now read everything you can about that subject to understand it before you just make an opinion. You're getting one opinion on hopefully a guy who's well read, but go and listen to other ones. Again, you have unlimited resources at your fingertips to search this. Just don't be so quick to throw everything out. Maybe you need to change communities. You need, is it Mark Batterson, talks about change of pace plus change of pace, change of place, because change of pace equals change of perspective. So slow down, speed up, move away, move back, and try to find a different perspective of what's going on. And sometimes, man, you could just be feeling bad because you weren't getting enough sleep, right? You didn't work out, your diet sucked, like whatever it is. And we've just gone like, oh, everything's awful, God hates me. Like, well, no, you're living like hell and reaping hell. What did you expect?
One thing that really liberated me, as far as not so much the deconstruction part, but as trying to grow, right, in my spiritual formation. Even though evangelicalism loves to ride Luther's theses, and especially his perspective on works and grace and faith, evangelicalism can be very performative, right? Did you spend a quiet time with God today? How long did you pray for?
Absolutely.
Have you been fasting? Have you been this? Have you whatever? And so we become so hung up on doing the things that we think, oh, I'm not doing these things enough, so the graph isn't going up. Like, I'm not growing. I'm freaking out, whatever. And within that, and I learned this from both Eastern Orthodox and Catholicism, is that their theologies tend to be focused on just being human. How do we be? How do we exist in this world? And so, I guess to give an example for me personally is like, I chose to leave my family, and now I live in Northern California. And does that mean that that's not spiritual formation? Absolutely, it does. I'm learning how to live the farthest I've ever, maybe not the farthest, but definitely a big change in my life, because it came with a career change, and it came with having to be responsible for rent. It came with making sure that I am taking care of myself, like you talked about the physical aspect, right? So I'm working in 40 hours, and I have so much stuff to do for work, but I also have to make sure that I'm eating right, that I'm getting good sleep, that I'm not spending too much screen time. Like all those things also are a part of that spiritual formation, right? Because just because I read the Bible, that doesn't mean crap if you suck or nothing's really changing. Like, I don't know how else to say that. That's probably messed up to anyone who's listening, but
Back to the
just because you
peacemaker.
read the Bible, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a better Christian. But how do you put all those things together to then grow as a human being? Because we are spiritual beings, right? And I don't mean that in a Gnostic way. I just mean that God somehow has made us to where we exist in this world, but we're also connected to Him, and we just have to learn how to navigate it all. And all of that is part of that spiritual growth process.
Yeah, and I think if we remember that any virtue to put on or vice to put off can become a spiritual discipline, and that any of that can be used in our spiritual formation. I often talk about God as a a hunter, and the best hunters are the ones that take every little piece of that animal that they killed and they use it for everything, not just the meat, but they use the bones and everything. And God, in some way, that's a vision of spiritual formation, is that he takes everything and uses it to grow us.
So, Rob, one last question for you. If I'm going through desolation, what should I do?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need freedom and the space to do that, and Nato kind of didn't just allude to it. I mean, flat out was told, like, don't go there, don't be a part of church. I maybe that's the answer sometimes. I think it depends on your circumstances, but certainly I don't think you should probably be leading anything if you're going through that. Don't be in charge of community, but don't reject it. And so for me, I guess it comes down to three things. I would read the Psalms, because the Psalms give us permission. I would embrace Christian community because community gives us clarity. And then I would read the Gospels, man, because the Gospels give us hope. That's Jesus. And I would focus on Jesus' words and what Jesus is doing. Again, there's no glory in just deconstructing. We want to rebuild. We want to have a rebuilt life. And we want to do that around the way of Jesus, not just to destroy something and be like, haha, look what I destroyed. Like, no, if I walk in, my kid did that, I'm like, hey, clean it up. Like it takes a second to destroy something. It takes time and care to build something. And that's what we're doing, building a life that matters, of meaning, significance around the way of Jesus. So the Psalms, community, the gospel, all of that I think is really important if you're going through desolation. And it's okay to say, hey, I'm not going to serve right now. I'm not going to lead right now, but I am going to be invested in people, and have them over for dinner, go see a movie, go, whatever, just be with people. And then the times you're in the scriptures, man, Psalms and the Gospels, find yourself a New Testament that just has like the Psalms and Proverbs tacked at the end, and just carry that around in your pocket all the time, So obviously there's a lot that we can talk about deconstruction. We've spent 2 episodes on this, and I think for us, it's not just about deconstruction. It's about, are we deconverting, or is this desolation? Is this something God is using to grow us, and to not throw out the baby with the bathwater on that? And so I want to encourage you, like, if you're going through church hurt right now, please, like, go find professional help, not just friends, but wise counsel that has been through this, a third party that maybe doesn't know everybody in the situation, that could, somebody that's going to give you client patient confidentiality, so you can share what you're actually going through, is all really important and worth finding the money in your budget to go do that. And prioritize your mental health if you're going through this time. Find somebody who's a Christian who can walk through with you on that. Find a good life group or small group or growth group, whatever you want to call it, that you can meet with. And really, and we'll probably talk about that at some point. But hey, 3 people, like you and 2 other friends, that can get together and just talk and walk through this and be honest with them. It's just so important. But we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at hello@rebuilt.life. You can check out, I have some other articles on deconstruction, consolation, desolation there. You can find out more on that. But ultimately, if this is helpful for you, if you like and want to hear more, we'd love just encouragement from you. And you can do that. Send us an email, or you leave us a review on iTunes if you're listening on that platform. We'd love to know you're out there. And so we do look at those, read those, and we just appreciate your feedback. And so we're not doing this just to be an echo chamber, but to grow and learn. And maybe we missed the mark on something, and we'd love to hear that too. And maybe we'll read that on air, and talk about that. But we just invite you in on this conversation with us. So until next time, this is the Rebuilt Life podcast. Well, that wraps up that episode. Thank you so much for listening and joining us on this journey. We would love to hear from you, so feel free to email us at hello@rebuilt.life. And be sure to like us on Facebook at Rebuilt Life or on YouTube just by searching my name, Robby Ballmeyer. If these conversations have been helpful to you, it would mean so much for us if you would leave us a review on iTunes or maybe share this episode with a couple of friends. Until next time, let's keep building together.